Everything old is new again. America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
The Marx Brothers are lionized today, but they had very few box office hits back in the 1930s, when their humor, like Field's, was thought to be too sophisticated. Instead, moviegoers flocked to the films of fellow Broadway stars Burt Wheeler and Robert Woolsey. Woolsey, the one with a cigar, was the fast talker of the pair. Wheeler, with the baby face, was the innocent, who also sang on occasion and dabbled in romantic interludes. The team hit their stride in the mid-1930s with the nonsense classic Diplomaniacs, in which they played barbers on an Indian reservation who were sent to the Geneva Peace Conference and bid farewell in Pig Latin.
Good gay I may, and peace for all is our cry.
Wheeler and Woolsey made their last film together in 1938, but these forgotten comics are still there on film, waiting like Joey Brown to entertain a new generation of audiences who are beginning to rediscover them and find that they can still tickle a funny bone more than 50 years later.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. This is Douglas Viviani with the Wheeler to my Woolsey, David Cohen. David Cohen, how are you?
I'll take that as a compliment. I'm good. I've been waiting for this, Doug, this show. You know, you and I have been really waiting for this one, right?
We have. We've done it. We have finally done it. If you're a regular listener of Everything Old is New Again, you've heard a number of times us get involved with and try to figure out who are Wheeler and Woolsey. We've had trouble with the last name. I initially pronounced it Woolsey, and that was incorrect. We've gone through all of that. But listen, we have been able to track down what I am going to say is an expert on Wheeler and Woolsey, a gentleman who wrote a book, The Clown Princes of Musical Comedy. Joseph Hyatt. Now we're going to call him Irv, which is his first name. But if you're looking for any of these books, and he's got a lot of books on Laurel and Hardy, we'll get involved with what that's about. Joseph Hyatt's an entertainment archaeologist, if you will, as well as an author. He currently serves on the Board of Trustees for the Union County Performing Arts Center, New Jersey, a fully restored 1928 movie vaudeville palace. Again, he's written a number of books that can be found on Amazon.com, focusing on Laurel and Hardy, Leo Gorsey and Dead End Kids, East Side Comedy, featuring lobby cards. They have got movie posters and publicity in these books. It's also got a book about Stan Laurel's first valet, Jimmy Murphy, which we'll talk about, because this gentleman, Jimmy Murphy, also works for Burt Wheeler, and our guest, Joseph Hyatt, or Irv Hyatt, has had a relationship and discussed the things that we're going to talk about today, and all things Wheeler and Woolsey with Jimmy Murphy, and it's going to be an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Irv, are you there? Can you hear us?
I'm here. I can hear you, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely a pleasure, Irv Hyatt. How did you get involved with, or even be exposed to, Wheeler and Woolsey, when it seems like you probably found this before, most of the general public these days certainly know Laurel and Hardy, know Three Stooges, their contemporaries, but are not familiar with Wheeler and Woolsey. Maybe you can give a little idea as to how you got involved and who is this comedy team?
Okay, the easiest, shortest route to how I got involved. Back in the days, in mid-half century ago, we were television fans who would have about 5 channels. Channels would show the old 1930s movies, so like every other kid my age, we got hung up on Abbott and Costello, hung up on Laurel and Hardy, the Bowery Boys. And locally, when I was about 11 years old, we had a fireman at a firehouse that used to collect movies. And on Saturdays, he would open up the station and show old movies, and one of his favorites were Wheeler and Woolsey. And after talking to him, I got my first projector. I was about 12 years old. But I always hunt down Wheeler and Woolsey films as I started to collect 16 millimeter until I had a fairly good set of the films. So that was my exposure. And the reason that Wheeler and Woolsey appeal is they're like a poor man's Marx Brothers. They're incredible. They do as a team as what the Marx Brothers did with four people.
Now, I noticed that they do song and dance, and a number of occasions I can see reference, whether it's in your book or elsewhere, that the writer of a particular, or writers of a particular song or number that they do in a movie originally wrote it for Groucho or wrote it for the Marx Brothers, and I guess it was passed upon and passed down to or over to Wheeler and Woolsey. Is that how it worked?
Yes, you're talking about Bert Kalmar and Harry Ruby. Bert Kalmar and Harry Ruby, if you're familiar with the Marx Brothers, did Hooray for Captain Spaulding, which Groucho used for his theme song. There's a song in one of the Wheeler and Woolsey films called Just Keep On Doing What You're Doing. Great, funny love song that was written for Duck Soup. When it wasn't used for Duck Soup, Bert Wheeler was friends with Kalmar. They were talking, and Kalmar actually allowed them to use it for their RKO film. And the relationship went on from there. They did a lot of Kalmar and Ruby did a lot for the Marx Brothers and a lot for Wheeler and Woolsey.
Now, just to place this in time, as far as feature films are concerned, this comedy team was around basically from 29 to 37, basically during the Depression era, and that's where we're focusing on our so we'll just say examination of Wheeler and Woolsey. Is that correct time frame?
That's correct. What happened is they starred in one of the Ziegfeld Follies, which led to Rio Rita, which was a Broadway play, which RKO created a film from, and their popularity just went from there. They were one of RKO's biggest moneymakers.
All right, and let's take a little listen to Wheeler and Woolsey. We've played a little bit of this previously on air, just to kind of refresh everyone's memory and or introduce everyone here to Wheeler and Woolsey at the World's Fair 1933.
Hey, Bert, we'll have to hurry and see the whole fair today. It's only going to be here 2 more days.
You're crazy. The fair just opened. What makes you think it's only going to be here 2 more days?
Well, look at this newspaper. It says right in the corner, fair today and fair tomorrow.
That's the weather, you sap. Say, will you look at that mob?
Yeah, it's so crowded here, a woman fainted this morning, and she had to walk 2 miles before she could fall down.
You know what makes it so crowded?
What?
People.
There you go, a little piece of it. David Cohen, what do you have to say about all of this?
You know, one thing I want to say is that joke about the woman had to walk a mile before she could fall down because it was so crowded, that's really funny. But just for frame of reference for our listeners, I think people might be familiar with the Geico commercial that's popular now where it's just okay. That's probably the best way to describe Wheeler and Woolsey because Doug and I have listened to these guys ad nauseum, and I would say on average, maybe 1 out of every 10 jokes is funny, and the other 9 are just hit your head against your hand against your head. You're just like, oh God, that's so bad. So the fascination we have is, and really, this is a question for you. Why were they so popular if they just weren't that good?
Well, what would happen with Wheeler and Woolsey when you're talking about specific jokes? It's like the Marx Brothers. They just kept jokes coming and coming and coming. And whether every one hit or every third one hit, there was enough material where if you saw them with an audience, it's different than seeing them alone. The audience laughter would carry even the bad jokes. I've got to tell you, at the Union County Performing Arts Center 2 summers ago, we ran 4 Wheeler and Woolsey films, 1 a week, and the audience reaction was terrific. And 2 of the films were their weaker films.
So maybe what we're saying here is that if they're presenting, let's just do for numbers, 5 jokes, 1 out of 5 hits, but there's enough laughter there that you're laughing over the other 4 jokes. Is that pretty much what we're looking at?
Yeah, that's what you're looking at. That's why, if you notice with the Marx Brothers, they tended to slow down. After the 5th film, they tended to slow down with better writers. But Wheeler and Woolsey were a product of their time, and that's also vaudeville was a very rapid pattern.
And we've got a hard break here. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New again with Joseph Hyatt, talking Wheeler and Woolsey.
Good day, I may.
Who are they?
That means we're
Hi, I'm John Billingsley. I was never a starving actor. But I do remember exulting when I found a $10 bill on the sidewalk one day. Breakfast. 1 in 5 Americans are food insecure. They wake up in the morning and they're not sure whether they're going to get enough to eat that day. And that's why I help run the Hollywood Food Coalition. We serve a hot, nutritious 5-course meal to hungry men, women, and children 7 nights a week, 365 days a year. We distribute clothing, shoes, blankets, backpacks, you name it. We help people access a huge array of other services from partner groups. Please join us by making a donation to the Hollywood Food Coalition through our website, hofoco.org, HOFOCO.org. $3 buys a hungry person a great 5-course meal. And please, consider volunteering for your local food bank, conduct a food drive, figure out what part you can play in helping to rebuild our frayed social safety net, because America works from the ground up. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Good work, son. That's swell, Spanky. We're all set. Move over. Okie dokie. You see, officer?
I know. You're going to a fire.
Oh, no, we're going to a hospital. You see, the kid is sick.
I'm not sick.
Oh, yes, you are, sweetness.
I feel fine.
You see, he's delirious. Oh, yeah? Well, what's wrong with him?
He has gall trouble. This kid has more gall than any kid I ever saw.
Back here on Everything Old is New Again with David Cohen talking all things Wheeler and Woolsey, our private fascination here with trying to understand this group and where they're coming from, where they how they existed in the Depression era. And we're with Joseph Hyatt, Irv Hyatt, who's written a number of books, and the one that we're focusing on is Wheeler and Woolsey, the clown princes of musical comedy. You can get some information about them, some publicity photos, lobby cards and so forth, and see what this is all about. The question that David and I have is that Wheeler and Woolsey, they competed in this day with the Three Stooges, Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, and all signs show, let's just say first, that they either were very competitive or even beat them at the box office. Let's just get that first. Is that correct?
That is correct. They were RKO's hottest comedy team, and RKO was one of the main studios back then.
All right, so now when we listen to and see their work, and I'm not trying to insult anyone or put anyone down, but I want to just get an idea here from now, 80 years down the line here. Like some of it is works, and we were saying some of it doesn't. When you hear some of these, the way they're presenting their jokes and so forth, it's clearly different response, I think, from Three Stooges, Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy. What was the contemporary feel? How did they earn so much money? What was the fascination of the general public back then to put them up with the likes of, the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy?
Well, I think what we're doing is we're taking a look at something that we are so regularly exposed to, maybe not so much lately. We're so exposed to the Marx Brothers. We're so exposed to Laurel and Hardy. Not that they're not funny, but the comedy we grew up with. It seems smoother than to us because we're not used to hearing the Wheeler and Woolsey style. But as far as the day where it was concerned, they were all very stylish, all very funny. They were it would be like comparing Jerry Seinfeld to Larry Davis. They both have different styles, but both of them are funny. And I'm sure 90 years from now, people are going to be wondering what Larry Davis was.
It's pretty much what we're wondering. Now, let me ask maybe a different question along the same lines of David. How is it then that... I stumbled upon them just in searching for something different. And I don't know that the general public these days are aware of them at all. How is it that if they were popular back then, that they've fallen off into obscurity at this point?
Well, a lot of it has to do with film distribution, whether television stations picked them up as part of the package. As you know, Hal Roach was one of the first ones to sell his movies to television. And then Columbia released the Three Stooges to television. So they got a lot more exposure than Wheeler and Woolsey. Wheeler and Woolsey was part of a package that included Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, more of the basic RKOs. When we're talking about funny, let me just very quickly give you the funniest line I think I ever heard in any movie, and it was in a Wheeler and Woolsey movie. Robert Woolsey is playing a AWOL Army soldier who has to hide from the general, so he disguises himself as a waiter. General walks in. Now, obviously, if it's tipped off, Woolsey's in trouble. But Woolsey looks at the general and says, "Can I help you, sir?" He says, "Yeah, can I have a wild duck?" So Woolsey looked at him and says, "We don't have any wild duck, but I can take a tame one out back and aggravate him for you."
Okay.
Now, no matter what comedy team delivers that's like a dynamite joke.
Yes. Now, but some of them that they present sound like what we call, what would you say, David, like dad jokes now? I mean, it's a different time and a different place, but in today's world, they seem, what would you say, corny, no?
Yeah, they're corny and
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. I'm sorry, Irv. Dave has. I'm sorry, Irv.
Go ahead. Let him.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Dave has a question. I'll let him present it, and then we'll follow that up. David.
Yeah, I would say they're corny. They're sort of dad jokes. But I guess I'm just of a differing viewpoint. That I don't think it's like comparing Larry David to Jerry Seinfeld. I put those guys up at a pretty level footing, whereas Woolsey and his partner, I would say, are quite below the rest. But I understand where you're coming from, Irv.
Okay, so Irv, if you could follow up, the bottom line is following up our question, and he was saying that the comparison of Seinfeld and Larry David, he feels that they're contemporary and equal, if you will, and David's position is, well, maybe Three Stooges, Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy were of better quality than Wheeler and Woolsey. Maybe you could just have an argument you love to have with that statement and see what you would say to that.
Yeah, when it comes to quality, I think you had full studio backing on every one. I think it was more stylistic. Keep in mind, too, that maybe Wheeler and Woolsey were a bit weaker than a Laurel and Hardy or an Abbott and Costello. But you had a thing known as the code, the production code. And in 1929, when sound first came to movies were getting more and more risque, till about 1935 when they started clamping down on the code. So when you look at Wheeler and Woolsey films, you might have some black jokes, but they are a little more risque than your Laurel and Hardy and Marx Brothers that were around at the time. So that might have contributed to some of their box office as well.
So we're pulling out of the interview here for a moment. We had to tape that interview. David was out of the state, and Irv is in another state. So we taped this interview in advance. So we're coming out for a minute just to say hello and let you know that that we're going to continue discussing Wheeler and Woolsey next week as well. Believe it or not, David, can you believe that there's even more to talk about?
I do believe. I mean, we could expand this into 7 shows as far as I'm concerned.
It's just a fascination. I don't know how or why we're so fascinated. We're exploring it based on the idea that how is it that there's a group that we never knew about that sold, as many tickets live that they did, and I think it was 21 movies, and we're top of the game, saved a whole movie studio. So I guess it is sort of because of this risque business. What do you think?
I mean, I guess so, yeah. I guess if you're going to a movie theater because that's the only source of entertainment in the day, and, they were always changing the acts within the movie theater, then, hey, if you heard these guys were sort of cutting edge and, more on the risque, pushing the guidelines, the envelope of the guidelines. I could see it attracting a crowd. I mean, they would probably attract a crowd today, given similar restrictions. So that explains part of it to me. I don't know if it explains the whole thing.
But now I'm thinking, because we like and you like, and we did it with the music. We were into the new music scene, the Police before they were big, and the Clash and so forth, and Squeeze. If you remember, so we were sort of into that, the new stuff, something different. I'm wondering, we sort of had that mindset. I wonder if we were kids or, high schoolers in, I guess it would be the 20s and 30s when these guys came out, if that would have been our thing, because they were totally different. And for the time, we don't always get the jokes, but for the time, were risque and different. Maybe we would have been big fans now that I think about it. I wonder.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't so much about how funny the jokes were. Maybe it was more about, how the whole double entendre thing,
right?
How risque they were, and trying to figure out what they really meant. Maybe that was the allure, and maybe that's why it might have attracted people like you and I when we were younger. Attracted people like you and me when we were younger. Because of that, it's almost like remember Andrew Dice Clay? I mean, they're not the same category, but one of the appeals of him, why he was so popular, was his foul language and how he used it with child's rhymes, and it was a novelty.
Right,
people wanted to see it.
Right, first time that barrier was broken, cursing like that and being so filthy. So now it is analogous to them, Wheeler and Woolsey, back in the 1920s. I mean, they didn't curse, and so I'm just saying, but they pushed the limits a little bit and and made people take notice of what they were doing. I don't know. I think that's possible, but there's still a fascination because I don't know that they would have disappeared. Well, let's look at it this way. Will Dice Clay be around 80 years from now? Will people even know who he was? I bet you not. But he only made one movie, so it's hard to say. I mean, they made 20 movies.
Maybe. I mean, the world's different now, too, because everything's been recorded and ad nauseum and social media and everything. But it's still a partial explanation for me, but I still don't understand how just you and I have never heard of these guys. It's like, like you and I are suddenly living in like Earth 2. Like there's a parallel world that we were just transported to with a history that obviously we're not completely familiar with because it's not the same as Earth 1.
Exactly, but we will become more familiar when we continue. And everything old is new again, talking with Irv Hyatt about Wheeler and Woolsey.
Good day, I may. That means we're saying goodbye.
All right, so Doug, people have been saying, hey, I could find you guys on YouTube. You have your own YouTube channel. I can find you on Facebook. But what about other social media? Do you exist anywhere else in the social media universe?
Yes, we do. We're on Instagram and we're on Twitter. At the same thing, you go at EONA Show. That's Everything Old is New Again. The initials, right? So it's EONA Show. And that's it, at EONA Show. You got Instagram, Twitter, and I'll tell you, we post pictures, behind-the-scenes stuff, trivia questions, contests, notes about the show, so you have a lot of fun. Subscribe to us, friend us on Facebook if you can, and subscribe to the YouTube, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram.
That's fun. I'm going to even start doing that.
It might be worth your while. You can actually know what we're going to do next week.
Good.
At EONA Show. That's at EONA Show.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
There we go, and we're talking with Wheeler and Woolsey expert, if you will, Irv Joseph Hyatt, who's written the book Wheeler and Woolsey, The Clown Princes of Musical Comedy. We're trying to figure out what it's all about. Well, let's get right back to it. Okay, so now, David, I've seen some of these films, and they do have some risque discussions here and there, a lot of double entendre going on with some of the music and some of their, jokes and statements. So, would you think that would lend itself maybe to some of the reason why there was this fascination with, let's say, our grandparents and grandparents with this group, that they're saying things that other ones would not would not risk saying, because Wheeler and Woolsey would be free to say it because they want to strive to compete with the greats, let's say?
Is that a question for me?
No, that actually would be, sorry, it would be for Irv.
No, I don't think it was so much. I think, again, it was stylistic of the time. You have another comedy team that appeared around the same time called Clark and McCullough, Bobby Clark and Paul McCullough. And they did shorts. They never graduated into features. They were a little bit weaker, but they were just as popular. And you have the same situation. Paul McCullough committed suicide in 1936, which meant that the comedy team really broke up before it could develop. Wheeler and Woolsey had the pleasure of being together for about 7 years or so, but a team like Laurel and Hardy did films from 1926 to 1945. So they had a little bit more room for growth. Some of their earlier stuff is not as funny as some of their later stuff. Again, I think it's more taste and style. I can see where the word dad jokes would really fit a Wheeler and Woolsey cover.
And along those lines, we kind of jumped on that and developed some characters in his little routine ourselves. That I'm not going to play that, but I want to play just a clip of our prior show and what our impression was in terms of our ideas about what's going on with Wheeler and Woolsey.
Oh, God, how humiliating, getting thrown out of a funeral. This is terrible.
Yeah, we're standing here right in the middle of a cemetery.
I love cemeteries.
Well, why is that?
Well, everybody's dying to get in.
But I'm bummed. And there you go. There is the first incarnation of the Everything Old is New Again, Wheeler and Woolsey's Kids Comedy Hour. You got to be kidding me if you don't think that Wheeler and Woolsey will be the perfect human hosts for a television show for kids today in 2000, let's say 20.
It could work.
All right, so that's our prior show and about Wheeler and Woolsey or surrounding that. And so we talk jumping off of the dad joke theme. Do you think that they would appeal, and or do they appeal across all ages? And would they appeal, do you think, today to a younger audience?
No, I think you're going to have that problem if you put any of the 1930s stars to a younger audience. I think they move too slow, and the jokes, even though as corny they are, they're very cerebral jokes. Even the cemetery joke, everybody's dying to get in. You've really got to think about that a little bit. So I'm not sure if that would go with a kiddie audience today.
Right, but we're going to make it.
Might be too boring for the kids today.
That's where the comedy for us would come in. But I understand what you're saying. Let's ask, or I'm going to ask you, if you're talking about a particular joke, we had trouble understanding this one. I think we figured it out, but maybe just listen to this joke and maybe you could explain it to us. It's a 9-second joke. Let's see.
How would you each like $1 million?
Well, I don't know whether you can get Willie that cheap or not. You see, Willie here has scruples.
No, I haven't. Not since I used witch hazel.
Okay, David Cohen, remember that?
I do, and I think we were saying that witch hazel was a medicine used. I don't know if it worked, but we just didn't know what they meant by scruples. Maybe scruples had some sort of double meaning that doesn't really translate today.
We had trouble understanding. Yes, witch hazel apparently is a sort of a medication, but did the word scruples have anything to do with it? Did it have a double entendre, and or was that joke basically the idea that witch hazel, which seemed to be popular at the time, would resolve or overcome any guilt or that he would have for taking this money?
See, that's one of those. That's one of those jokes that are extremely dated. It's referring to probably a sexual disease as a double entendre. Well, I had scruples, and scruples would be a word that would take the place of something that wasn't funny. It was just a funny name that would make you think of a venereal disease. Very much like where Wheeler Woolsey walks up to a woman, and he's looking at her knees, and the woman says, "You're not looking at my knees, are you?" He says, "No, I'm way above that."
Right. So, all right. So I think we on the other side of the fence need to take a look a little bit more with an eye towards this double entendre, because I think, David, you and I maybe we're not catching some of those double entendre in some of these jokes. Could that be possible, David?
Yeah. Well, no, I understood the knees joke. Yeah, and I assume that's what they meant by scruples, but Irv saying that and clarifying that does lend some more credence to the joke, and it is funnier than now that we understand it a little better.
Right, that's the thing. Now, I don't think some of the jokes that we're saying don't work for us, and we're not putting everybody down. We enjoy this topic, we enjoy this group, but I think we're not understanding the total context of the joke, and I think you explaining what you just said certainly makes that joke more understandable and funnier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, let's take just one more of those odd jokes. There's one point in the Cockeyed Cavaliers where Wheeler and Woolsey are talking, and Woolsey says, well, she's liable to have us beheaded. And Wheeler says, beheaded? Can she do that? And the response is, yes, she can behead. But that doesn't sound funny until you put their accents in.
Right.
And you think that a tag for that time, yes, she could be had.
Right. So we're missing some of the wordplay is, I guess, what we would
missing
say.
A lot of the wordplay.
Right. Now,
different era, though.
Do you think, this is just an idea, that it would be interesting to play a Wheeler and Woolsey movie and stop and go and have someone like yourself explain some of these jokes. I know that sounds silly, but on the other hand, it's almost like we're missing out on what our grandparents enjoyed.
Well, it doesn't sound silly because if you get the new set of Marx Brothers DVDs that were just released, there is a secondary track where you put the subtitles on and you listen to the secondary track, and they actually do explain some of the Depression-style humor.
David Cohen, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It might help a little bit. But, you know,
well, this also explains why there's never going to be a huge comeback for Wheeler and Woolsey. The guys that really get into them find them, like, beyond hilarious.
Interesting. Okay. And David, you're saying that it explains some of it, and I think that's certainly helps us along those lines. But there are other things or that we're curious about Wheeler and Woolsey, and I'm just curious. I'm going to just kind of go for a moment here about some commonalities that they have with Abbott Costello. But let me first play a routine here very briefly. I don't think David's heard this before. See if this rings a bell or sounds familiar.
In order for your army to attack me, you leave Azazaz and proceed in a northerly direction to the town of what?
What?
That's right.
What's right?
What's right?
That's what I said. What's right?
Well, I agreed with you, didn't I?
On what?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Listen, remember my nasty temper. What town is it?
That's what?
That's all I wanted to know. Now, what town is next to what?
Which?
Next to what?
Which?
Which is next to what?
Yes.
I'm sorry I asked you. Go ahead.
Well, now that that's all cleared up.
David Cohen, what do you think of this?
So what came first, the Abbott and Costello routine?
No,
I don't mean to be punny here. What came first? Which routine was created first?
Which came first? Certainly Wheeler and Woolsey's, this routine came at least 10 years before the Abbott Costello presentation of this routine, but this is an old-style vaudeville routine, is it not?
Right. This is this came before General Diddy died.
Right.
Where if you go through the routine, it's General Diddy died, Diddy yes. Abbott and Costello, and it's going to be unpopular for me to say this, probably weren't the first to do Who's On First.
Right.
It's been done longer than Abbott and Costello did, and there's always been this type of wordplay. This is where we were talking about it's not really the writers, but the directors. If that had the right director and they could do it as if they were doing it live on stage, it would have come out as funny.
We're coming up on our break here, so we will continue the fun and the exploration of Wheeler and Woolsey with a gentleman that is the resident expert on this lost comedy duo, Joseph Hyatt. Irv Hyatt, The Clown Princes of Musical Comedy is the book. Wheeler and Woolsey, we've been trying to figure out who they are for the longest time. Well, now we are starting to learn.
Not Marie or Emily or Doris.
Be right back.
Only my Dolores.
These days, the news is full of teen suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, bullying. It's depressing and concerning, but there is hope. WWE Intercontinental Champion Mark Merrow.
Champion Choice is a live presentation that empowers students to make positive choices and live their best life. I teach students how to live a drug-free life, prevent bullying, avoid peer pressure, and keep negative people out of their lives. We are defined by our choices. There is hope.
To schedule a Champion of Choices presentation for your school or organization, visit thinkpaz.org. That's thinkpaz.org.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
We are back with Irv Hyatt talking all things Wheeler and Woolsey, a long forgotten comedy team. Let's get back to it.
I just think that the Abbott and Costello routine, the writing was exponentially better, and I think that's what the difference is. I think they might have borrowed the idea, but the execution by Abbott and Costello was just miles ahead of these guys, regardless of whether they did it live or whether you're watching it alone.
The Abbott and Costello Who's On First comes over as a classic, whereas this one really falls flat. But if you watch Abbott and Costello do Who's On First a number of times, again, it depends on the director. When they did it in their Abbott and Costello TV show in the 50s, they even made a mistake in the middle of the lines, which the laugh track covered and took us through. So it's the material, it's the presenters, and it's the directors. That routine should have probably never been committed to film.
Right, but it was, but it still was in some ways successful, and that's our fascination in some ways with right, David, with this whole group, is that they seem to have overcome. Clearly, they overcame, whether it be material or execution or whatever it might be. They overcame and became successful in an era where these they were competing for the entertainment dollar with giants in the field. David?
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. You said it perfectly, Doug.
Okay, so Irv, if you could respond to that.
I didn't hear that.
No, to what I had just said.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you just say?
The fact that they're competing for the entertainment dollar of the giants in the industry, and their material and their execution just doesn't seem to be, at least as we just heard there in that take, up to snuff, let's say, with them. But yet they were able to compete with the giants without the material and without the execution. But they were able to compete. They made a lot of money and were very successful. Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% right. And again, I hate to lean on other comedians, but if you take Buster Keaton from the time he started, right up until the sound days where he had control of his own material and how it was presented, I mean, he was the highest paid star in Hollywood in 1930. Once he began working for MGM, different directors, different factors in making of the films, he just fell from the top. He nothing that he did. He would do a 20-minute movie with about 2 minutes worth of watching, and the rest of it was dead. But he still attracted audience.
But now
people actually liked the person.
So, like, let's get ourselves into let's just say it's 1935. There's a depression going on. There's a lot of trouble and difficulties in the world, at least in the country. And you've got you go down Broadway, let's say, or some Main Street USA, and you've got a Laurel and Hardy movie. You've got a Three Stooges movie, and down the block you've got Wheeler and Woolsey. If you can take us down the thought process of our grandparents, great grandparents, which one would they choose first? And forget that for a moment. Would they eventually make the way? It sounds like they would make their way to the Wheeler and Woolsey movie and do that at least 21 times. So, what was their thought process, if you know?
That's a part of it. Part of it was probably Laurel and Hardy would have gotten the first nickel, and if there was a nickel left over, maybe Buster Keaton or one of the other comedians would have gotten that nickel. And then maybe if there was a nickel left over, it would have been Wheeler and Woolsey. But there were enough nickels there that make Wheeler and Woolsey worthwhile. Keep in mind that movie theaters used to change their programs 3 times a week. You didn't have television, so you had something that played Sunday and Monday. Then you had a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday show, and then a Friday, Saturday show. And since most cities had maybe 2 theaters in the town, you might have a Wheeler and Woolsey and then go 4 months before there's a Laurel and Hardy, and then 6 months before there's a Chaplin, and then 8 months before there's a Marx Brothers, and then all of a sudden Wheeler and Woolsey, who made 4 films that year, they're back in the theaters again. So I don't think it was so much that they were favored or unfavored. I think it's like when you put on America's Got Talent because there's nothing else on. But America's Got Talent is enough to hold your attention.
Right. So just to be silly about it, if you're watching Laurel and Hardy, you're going to get 20, make it up, 20 great laughs. Wheeler and Woolsey, maybe you'll get 3, but you're going to do it anyway because that's your mindset and that's what's out there. And you want to hear a comedy, watch a comedy, you're going to give them a shot.
That and the fact that Wheeler and Woolsey had Kalmar and Ruby music, it had a lot of production value.
All right, let's talk about that. That's a very good point. Because David, I don't think you've actually seen them do, or have you, David, seen them perform the musical numbers in any of these movies?
I haven't, but I'll get to that in a sec. Yeah. But it's interesting, I think, to know that people didn't have a choice back then of what they went to see, if I'm understanding that correctly. You went to the theater, and whatever happened to be playing, you went regardless. So it's not like today where you're saying, oh, there's a movie I want to see, or I don't want to see that movie. You just went to the theater and whatever was on, you watched. So that seems to account for some of the popularity they had. It was a lack of choice.
Exactly.
It was sort of like a captive audience.
Correct. Exactly right. Especially in Main Street USA, where it's a little less number of theaters. You know. Irv, so what we were saying is about the musical numbers. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because when you watch an Abbott Costello movie, even Abbott Costello would tell you, especially in the beginning, they despise the fact that their movies were interfered with or interrupted by these musical numbers. And in the beginning, it was what do you call those sisters?
Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and Buck Privates.
Right. It was something of quality, but then it became more obscure, and they would kind of get upset about it, and it eventually was eliminated. But Wheeler and Woolsey seemed to grapple with that in a different way. They joined in. They were the musical entertainment as well. And is that something that's, you would say, is to their benefit? I saw a couple of them I thought actually were pretty interesting with the wordplay of these songs. So you tell me, was that some of the attraction, or did people go get popcorn when they began the musical numbers?
As the old Groucho Marx line, listen, Harpo's at the heart. It's time for you to go to the lobby and get popcorn.
Right.
The films prior to 1935, they were pretty much code-free, so you had some risque dance numbers that, if it was done right, was incorporated into the film. And if you had musical theater stars like Wheeler and Woolsey, they were not afraid to become a part. And I think that's part of their popularity as well. When they did the team tap dances, I mean, it was incredible how these two guys matched. Keep in mind that I think Woolsey was 5 foot and Wheeler was like 4'11".
Huh.
So any female they worked with had to be around 4'10" to make the dance images look right. But these guys had the ability to sing, the ability to dance. They were just the entire package for their time. Now, Irving Thalberg felt that if a movie didn't have musical numbers in it, it wouldn't appeal to women. He felt that was the problem with Marx Brothers and the like. So anything, if you take a look at it from about 1935 on, the music becomes less integral to the film. They're inserted. And by the time Abbott and Costello became popular, the first 3 or 4 movies had some big numbers, but every movie beyond that, right up into the 50s, had some dog songs.
Exactly. And so are we saying some of the attraction is that the Wheeler and Woolsey music, it had the stars in performing that. So of course that's a different feel than, okay, Harpo's at the Marx, well, that's that's still a star, but okay, Abbott Costello's off the screen, we've got to listen to this, it's kind of a bump in the road. So maybe that did their contemporaries enjoy that music, and or a better question is, what did their contemporaries feel about Wheeler and Woolsey?
Well, the contemporaries enjoyed them. Burt Wheeler was extremely well respected as a Broadway star. But just getting real back to the music very quickly.
Sure.
The music was an internal part of a Wheeler and Woolsey film because they were musical comedies. When you were watching it, it was like you were watching people who just didn't do comedy. You were watching people who did variety. So it was a variety act more so than a comedy act.
So there's less pressure, if you will, on the... I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but less pressure on trying to just be funny. There's other things that they're doing, so that the jokes don't have to be as funny, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it carries the film. Even Burt Wheeler, when spoken to in later life, he used to say, "You remember that film? My God, how freaky those jokes are." I mean, because even Burt Wheeler realized it was... to modern standards, it was creaky. I think it was creaky back then, but it was for the fun of it that people went.
So they were a little more on for today's language, on the dark side, if you will. They were a little more, like we said, risque, and whether they said something that was funny or not, just by saying something with a double entendre, got people to think and enjoy it over a wholesome entertainment, because this is just something a different option. Does that make sense?
Oh, the different option I'll give you, yes, without a doubt. They were a different option.
And unfortunately, we're out of time this week, but we will continue next week to talk all things Wheeler and Woolsey and try to figure more out about the crown princes of musical comedy. Come on back. Everything old is new again. Here with John Billingsley, and we're talking about the Hollywood Food Coalition. John, what is this?
Well, I'm the president of the board. We serve a hot, nutritious 5-course meal to hungry men, women, and children 7 nights a week, 365 days a year. Been doing it for 33 years. We distribute clothing and shoes and blankets and backpacks and you name it. And we help people access a huge array of other services from partner groups. And if you'd be interested in making a donation, hofoco.org, $3 buys a hungry person a great 5-course meal. HOFOCO.org.
You've been listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's pop culture entertainment talk show. Find us on the web at everythingoldisnewagain.biz. That's .biz.
See you next week. Same bat time, same bat station.